has been a fun or comfortable week for King Charles as these headlines have been going back and forth.
And that's why you and I and other commentators will sit here and recoil every time it happens and go, at what point is he going to go? Sod you. I can't bring. I'll tell you who I think is I say our. I mean, I would say the sensible person and who could have a real impact is Camilla.
Can you give me a prediction for when I'm talking to you this time, 2027? Where will Harry and Meghan be?
Stripped of their titles.
This is the exact moment the public mask slipped. But what the global media completely missed was the silent panic happening behind closed doors, an internal institutional shift that has quietly pushed the Sussex brand toward a definitive point of no return. For months, public relations strategies were meticulously deployed to orchestrate what insiders termed an international comeback tour. The objective was clear: reclaim the narrative, re-establish public leverage, and mirror historical avenues of public empathy. Yet, beneath the polished surface of coordinated appearances, an architectural fracture was forming within their operational framework. We are not just looking at a standard shift in public opinion. We are witnessing a systemic dismantling of a commercial apparatus that relied entirely on an institutional anchor it simultaneously sought to critique. The calls to remove their official designations are no longer mere tabloid speculation. They have evolved into an organized constitutional discussion within the highest echelons of British administration. The question is no longer if the breaking point will arrive, but how the remaining infrastructure will survive the impact when it does. To understand how the situation reached this critical threshold, we must first examine the foundational mechanics of the Sussex commercial model. According to prominent royal observers and media analysts, the primary asset under management has always been the inherited institutional prestige attached to their formal titles. When the initial pivot to a sovereign-adjacent lifestyle in California occurred, the market value of their brand was unprecedented. Major streaming networks and global publishers rushed to secure multi-million-dollar contracts, betting heavily on the couple's ability to merge classic institutional mystique with modern digital storytelling. However, public records and subsequent production timelines indicate a structural vulnerability in this model. The strategy shifted toward what market analysts describe as an unorthodox business model, a system where professional output increasingly relied on leveraging personal friction and structural critiques of the monarchy to generate engagement.
That they're milking the titles for commercial reasons. They also are making in my opinion, they're making the royal family's lives very difficult.
This specific revenue model followed a very distinct and volatile life cycle. It began fundamentally with the institutional anchor, which meant capitalizing on their official royal titles to secure high-tier access and corporate partnerships that would otherwise be unavailable to private citizens. Once that baseline was established, the strategy transitioned into a phase of public critique, utilizing historical grievances and internal palace conflicts to generate massive initial media interest and record-breaking view duration. With the global spotlight secured, the model shifted into direct commercial monetization, integrating high-status royal visibility into mainstream digital commerce, corporate sponsorships, and retail applications. However, this lifecycle ultimately leads to a severe public approval deficit, causing systemic exhaustion from international audiences who begin to push back against the constant commercialization of historic titles. As observed by industry specialists, the regular utilization of these high-status titles across commercial applications, ranging from digital lifestyle platforms to retail integration apps, has created an intense friction point. The public profile of the Duchess of Sussex, being attached to commercial interfaces, represents a severe departure from traditional protocol. This multi-tiered commercialization strategy has inevitably accelerated an unprecedented deficit in public approval across major international demographics. Polling data reveals that audiences in the United Kingdom, the United States, and Australia have begun experiencing a saturation point regarding this specific narrative architecture. The core issue is no longer just the commercialization itself, but the growing disconnect from reality that audiences perceive when high-status designations are utilized for direct digital commerce. The monetization of personal relationships, professional transitions, and narratives of exclusion has fundamentally altered how the global public views their platform. What was once seen as an innovative, independent venture is increasingly analyzed as a continuous effort to extract commercial value from the very institution they publicly distance themselves from. This dynamic has placed the reigning monarch in an extraordinarily complex position. King Charles III, while navigating a highly publicized and severe health crisis, has been forced to constantly manage the secondary stress of an ongoing public relations crossfire. The institutional focus, which should logically remain anchored on continuity and stability during a royal health transition, is repeatedly disrupted by highly coordinated media maneuvers originating from the California-based operation. The balance within the palace has not merely been disturbed, it has been systematically strained to a degree that requires immediate structural intervention. Observers note that the constant back and forth of public headlines creates an environment of instability that directly impacts the core administrative team of the monarchy, making a decisive resolution regarding their remaining official status an absolute operational necessity. This structural tension culminated in what communication experts view as a major strategic miscalculation during a recent visit to London. According to verified timelines obtained by royal reporters, an official invitation had been extended to Prince Harry, offering secure accommodation within a designated royal residence during his stay. This offer was intended to provide both operational safety and a controlled environment away from the speculative gaze of international media. However, behind the scenes, a stark deviation from standard protocol began to unfold. Operational reports suggest that the Sussex administrative team anticipated a comprehensive deployment of royal infrastructure, requesting the mobilization of an extensive household staff and a dedicated security apparatus to accommodate a multi-person entourage at Buckingham Palace. This complex administrative request required immediate logistical planning, leading palace officials to request formal confirmation by a strict Friday deadline. When it became evident that the automatic, sovereign-level armed protection detail would not be automatically reinstated for the duration of the trip, a decision was made to shift the conflict into the public sphere. A highly critical public statement was authorized, abruptly rejecting the palace's accommodation offer. This sudden public move was designed to exert immediate leverage on the palace administration. Yet, it completely misjudged the operational realities of the modern household. This specific failure highlights a deeper operational vulnerability within the Sussex advisory team. By failing to comprehend that royal logistical frameworks operate under strict security and labor guidelines, the Sussex team transformed a straightforward domestic arrangement into a highly visible public relations defeat. The immediate consequence was sharp. For the first time in recent history, a senior descendant of the monarch found themselves locked out of a primary royal residence due to an inability to adhere to basic administrative deadlines. But they had no idea this choice would trigger an immediate backlash from the one group they needed most, the senior leadership of the institution itself.
In the last
The
months of her
consequences
life,
of this ongoing operational
my mother
friction have
campaigned
now
to draw
solidified
attention
into a
the line
profound,
into the arena
long-term
of
institutional
political
isolation
campaigning.
that extends far beyond
for
a
her,
temporary
this
logistical
wasn't
dispute
about
at the palace
politics.
gates. Inside the historic walls of the royal household, the avenues for internal diplomacy have effectively closed, signaling a permanent shift in how the monarchy interacts with the California-based couple. Senior constitutional experts and palace insiders report that the Prince of Wales remains entirely aligned against any future structural reconciliation, viewing the preservation of the crown's integrity as an absolute, non-negotiable priority for his upcoming reign.
Repeating a low-key family visit. What's sensible behavior? I mean, if a dog has bitten you, you don't want to put your fingers back in its mouth, right? As if this is, as we all believe it is, totally contrary to what Prince William wants to happen, he's then going to have to, when he is the king, he'll then have to unpick it.
This unyielding position is not merely rooted in a personal or familial grievance, but represents a calculated institutional strategy designed to protect the sovereign framework from further unpredictable public disruptions. Prince William's long-term perspective has been permanently shaped by what senior aides describe as a systemic disregard for family and institutional boundaries over consecutive years, leaving absolutely no viable path back to the core operational circle of the working monarchy. To fully understand the weight of this internal barrier, one must look at the specific psychological profile of the future monarch. Industry specialists frequently note that Prince William possesses an exceptionally precise administrative memory, often described by those close to the household as a memory like an elephant. He has meticulously documented every public disclosure, every streaming documentary release, and every literary critique published by the Sussexes since their departure. From his perspective, these actions were not merely personal slights between brothers, but targeted, commercialized attacks on the foundational infrastructure of the British state. For this reason, the administrative strategy for the next reign is already being structured around absolute boundary enforcement. The future king does not view this conflict through the lens of family therapy, but through the lens of corporate risk management and statecraft, ensuring that any individual who treats the crown as an adversarial media commodity is permanently denied access to its institutional prestige.
Tell you who I think is I say our, I mean, I would say the sensible person and who could have a real impact is Camilla.
Oh, yes.
Because the word on the street is that she's even more angry about him than William is.
Simultaneously, Queen Camilla has maintained an equally firm stance regarding the strict maintenance of these institutional boundaries, adding a powerful layer of defense within the current administration. Her influence within the reigning framework is significant, serving as a protective anchor for King Charles III as he continues to navigate a demanding and highly sensitive medical regimen. Together with Prince William, she represents a united administrative front that consistently advises the king against allowing volatile or non-compliant elements to compromise the stability of the palace. Queen Camilla's perspective is deeply practical, as she has witnessed firsthand the immense psychological and operational strain that coordinated media campaigns from California place upon the monarch during moments when the state requires absolute stability. This internal unity between the current queen and the future king creates an impenetrable advisory barrier, effectively neutralizing any external attempts by West Coast public relations teams to manufacture a superficial or commercially driven family reunion. This explicit distance enforced by the palace has triggered a severe, compounding brand valuation crisis for the Sussex platform in California. In the global attention economy, their primary commercial leverage has always been their perceived proximity to the active working core of the royal family. When major streaming networks and international publishers originally signed their record-breaking multi-million-dollar contracts, they were investing under the assumption that the couple would maintain an ongoing, inside-track relationship with the British monarchy. As the palace visibly and systematically cuts off that access, enforcing an absolute informational blackout, that commercial leverage rapidly evaporates. Corporate partners are beginning to realize that the highly valued royal connection is no longer an active asset, but an increasingly isolated entity navigating a severe deficit in public prestige. What was once a highly lucrative narrative has now entered a phase of severe diminishing returns, as global media markets experience exhaustion regarding historical complaints that lack any current institutional relevance. This commercial decline is directly tied to the ultimate survival of their formal designations. While King Charles III has historically favored a path of patient diplomacy and fatherly non-confrontation, aiming to avoid a highly public and humiliating spectacle, the upcoming transition of power will fundamentally alter the legal and constitutional landscape. The operational reality is that the Sussex brand is rapidly approaching a state of total institutional detachment, leaving them with highly restricted options as their foundational credibility is systematically decommissioned by the crown. Senior palace analysts openly state that if legislative or royal actions do not formalize the removal of these titles during the current reign, the transition to the next reign will mark the immediate, definitive termination of their official status.
The monarchy in its entirety is going to have to go, listen, we don't trust you. We might love you, but we don't trust you. You can't be part of this. Be Harry, be my son, but don't. I'm not. But knowing Charles, I suspect he will bail him out and make excuses for him. And he'll try and get in before William becomes king. But I don't think she will ever come back to this country.
Prince William's approach to governance leaves absolutely no room for ambiguous, dual-hatted roles where individuals reside in a foreign republic, while simultaneously utilizing historic British peerages to anchor direct-to-consumer digital commerce platforms. This institutional perspective is further reinforced by shifting mechanics within the British Parliament, where discussions regarding the removal of titles have transitioned from theoretical debate into formal legislative proposals. Legal scholars point out that while the royal prerogative allows the monarch to confer titles, the actual stripping of an inherited peerage historically requires an act of parliament, such as the mechanism seen in historical precedents like the Titles Deprivation Act. Modern legislative efforts, including recent private members' bills introduced in the House of Commons, aim to grant the sovereign unilateral powers to remove peerages or to establish a joint parliamentary committee to recommend the absolute decommissioning of titles for non-working royals. This means the pressure is mounting from two completely distinct directions: an unyielding future monarch who refuses to accommodate commercialized royalty, and a legislative body that views the exploitation of British state titles for foreign corporate profit as a direct challenge to constitutional propriety. The trajectory leading toward the year 2027 presents an exceptionally complex strategic dilemma for the entire Sussex organization. As the institutional gates of London remain firmly shut, the long-term sustainability of their current business model faces an unprecedented operational challenge. The core narrative mechanics that generated their initial global impact and secured high-value corporate partnerships have reached a natural saturation point, leaving an international audience that is increasingly disengaged from historical grievances and shifting public statements. The commercial viability of utilizing high-status titles in private enterprise is facing a structural expiration date as global public sentiment moves entirely away from the drama of conflict and toward a demand for tangible professional output. The sentiment that the global public has simply had enough of the ongoing drama represents a profound shift in consumer behavior within the media marketplace, signaling that an adversarial brand identity cannot be sustained indefinitely without a continuous supply of fresh insider access. With their primary revenue streams requiring constant, high-stakes reinvention, and their formal titles facing an organized constitutional challenge from senior members of the British state, their next operational sequence will determine their permanent place in the modern media landscape. They are rapidly approaching a definitive crossroad where their administrative team must either successfully transition the brand into a completely independent, self-sustaining commercial entity or accept a state of permanent cultural and institutional isolation. The coming months will reveal whether a severely curated public persona can maintain its global market relevance when it is entirely stripped of the historic, sovereign anchor that originally created its value. When the core asset of a company is a title that implies public service and state representation, using that asset to power an AI-driven retail app or a lifestyle blog creates an ideological friction that modern consumers find increasingly difficult to reconcile. This ongoing transition ultimately raises a much larger, systemic question that extends far beyond the immediate conflict between the palace and the California operation. It forces an international audience to examine how a historic, traditional institution should protect its intellectual property, its trademark, and its constitutional integrity when its own official designations are transformed into global commercial assets in a fast-paced digital economy. For centuries, the titles of Duke and Duchess were treated as solemn instruments of state governance and regional leadership, bound by strict protocols and absolute loyalty to the reigning sovereign. In the digital age, however, these historic titles have been effectively decoupled from their geographic and administrative origins, functioning instead as high-status marketing devices in the competitive landscapes of Hollywood and global digital commerce. The final resolution of this specific title dispute will inevitably establish a significant historical precedent, permanently altering how the intersection of hereditary privilege, celebrity branding, and public accountability is managed on the world stage. As the administrative machinery of the crown moves steadily and deliberately toward a definitive conclusion, the true durability of the Sussex platform is about to face its ultimate and final operational test. The underlying message from the highest echelons of the palace administration is no longer ambiguous. An individual can maintain a personal relationship as a son or a relative, but they cannot expect the institution to subsidize a private commercial enterprise with the symbolic capital of the state when trust has been completely compromised. The systemic reality is that a 1,000-year-old monarchy operates on timelines that span generations, allowing it to patiently withstand short-term media storms while methodically protecting its long-term sovereign authority. The evolution of this conflict is no longer just a narrative about internal family dynamics, but a masterclass in institutional resilience, showing how a traditional power structure uses silence, protocol, and strict boundary enforcement to completely neutralize an unprecedented modern media challenge.